This week is the end of the war. It was the middle of the 19th century, and what America wasn't really well defined. Is it a confederation of different nations, a union of principalities, a mere group of states, or a lemur in a trench coat? After 4 years of brutal conflict, it has been defined. It is written in blood and tears. One nation, indivisible, conceived in liberty, the proposition that all men are created equal. Let's start this week with a continuation of Lee's demise. Last week saw the Army of Northern Virginia encircled, forced from Petersburg, broken apart time and time again. We start this week with the culmination of the Nth Night March. 3 of his commanders have been relieved: Generals Anderson, General Pickett, and General Johnson. Their commands so small that having a general lead them would diminish the rank. Again, Grant tries to send word for Lee to surrender, but these words won't reach the general until late afternoon. Sheridan soon after reports to Grant.
The enemy must have taken the fine road north of the Appomattox River. I will move on to Appomattox Court House. I think Lee will surrender today. I addressed him on the subject last evening and received a reply this morning asking the terms I wanted. We will push him until terms are agreed upon.
Sheridan understands completely and moves in to cut off Lee completely. The golden opportunity is spotted as undefended Confederate trains are spotted. With a gallant charge, all are captured. The rebel artillerymen waiting nearby watch as their hope for a fresh meal is stolen, forming a battle line with 30 of their guns. General Custer leads his brigade and charges into them. Starved men make terrible defenders and break. They have saved 70 of their guns, but those 30 do fall into Custer's hands. Sheridan then sends out a scout, Lieutenant Colonel Root, to find the main rebel army. Though Root is sadly killed in this expedition, he does locate Lee. Knowing he has been found and encircled, Lee holds a final conference of war. The army can only be saved if they can break through Sheridan's cavalry. If the horsemen hold, it's over, and if Union infantry arrives, it's done. General Gordon and General Rooney Lee will lead this last attempt, but if any infantry is spotted, it must be reported immediately, so he could
accede to the only alternative left to us.
That night, men are on the march. While General Lee and General Grant are mincing words about authority and desire versus wonder in their dispatches to each other, General Ord and Griffin bring forward their infantry, colored and non-colored men marching side by side, with fatigue and hunger trying to chip away at their endless endurance and spirit. At dawn on the 9th, General Smith's brigade of Sheridan's cavalry peer out on Palm Sunday, waiting. The rebels are in disarray, Gordon and Lee unable to make up their minds over whether the cavalry or infantry should lead. The nerves also get to Lee, asking Gordon whether he thinks he can win.
I have fought my corps to a frazzle, and I fear I can do nothing unless I am heavily supported by Longstreet's corps.
A final rebel yell is heard as 4,000 horsemen under General Fitzhugh Lee begin the battle, bearing down on General Smith's small brigade. With Spencer and Sharp's carbines, they hold their ground as long as possible but are soon forced back. General Crook sends forward 2 brigades of cavalry to hold the line as General Fitzhugh Lee tries to follow up the success, ordering the retreating Federalists to be chased down. Surprisingly, they actually scatter one of Crook's brigades, but the other successfully captures a battle standard. But after careful maneuvering, the Confederate cavalry have punched their way through the line. Lee receives reports that he's saved, that his men can escape. It is at this time General Ord's men arrive. A Confederate officer watches as they march into view.
Keep up your courage, boys. The infantry is coming right along in 2 columns, black and white, side by side, a regular checkerboard.
With that, the Confederates begin to fall back. Cavalry and infantrymen alike turn tail towards Lynchburg. Gordon falls back to Appomattox Court House, and more Union men arrive in front of Longstreet. Lee is left with no alternative. Great couriers ride up and down with white flags of truce. It becomes a race to stop the bleeding. General Custer orders the charge, and the final hostile bugle is sounded. With sabers aimed towards the Confederates, the horsemen rush, till they are stopped by General Gordon's aide waving a white flag. Custer confers with the men.
You will listen to no terms but that of unconditional surrender. We are behind your army now. It is at our mercy.
The 2 sides stand down, watching each other behind a temporarily suspended battle line. These men, for the last 4 years, have braved bullets, endured sleepless marches, hungry battles. 4 years of watching their friends and family cut down one by one, who have not deserted their post or sought an easy surrender, those willing to die under their respective banners. Wait to see. They must once again take their chances of battle. General Lee has no intention of fighting another. He solemnly rides in the direction which he believes Grant will receive him. Instead, he receives a note that Grant is ready for him, so he sends a message of his own.
I received your note of this morning on the picket line whether I'd come to meet you and ascertain definitely what terms were embraced in your proposal of yesterday with reference to the surrender of this army. I now request an interview in accordance with the offer contained in your letter of yesterday for that purpose. When the officer reached me, I was still suffering from the sick headache, but the instant I saw the contents of the note, I was cured.
The federal officers who hear the message give 3 cheers and some begin to cry. Grant pens a letter to Lee and moves to meet him. They're to meet at McQueen's house. Will McQueen offered his house to be used for this exact purpose. It is a perfect symbol. For McQueen only moved outside Appomattox in '62. His home was the site of the first battle of Bull Run, a man who unwillingly was forced to see the war from the beginning to the end. General Lee, somber and saddened, decided to present himself as best he could. He carried what appears to be the sword presented to him by the state of Virginia, his uniform splendid, clearly cleaned, and pressed before this meeting. He arrives first and takes his seat, waiting for Grant. Grant is not cleanly dressed, wearing attire that will be remembered as Lee's contrast even many years later. Following Grant is his staff. They enter the room one by one. Lee stands and shakes Grant's hand. These 2 men served for years under the same army, both veterans of the Mexican-American War. Lee says he remembers Grant very well. Being 16 years his elder and at the time high in rank, this is most likely flattery. Grant claims he remembers Lee perfectly and begins to go on about their times in Mexico before Lee interrupts.
General, I have come to treat about the surrender of my army. I think the best way would be for you to put your terms in writing. I propose to receive the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia on the following terms to wit. Rolls of all officers and men to be made in duplicate, 1 copy to be given to an officer designated by me, the other to be retained by such officer or officers as you may designate. The officers to give their individual paroles not to take up arms against the government of the United States until properly exchanged, and each company or regimental commander sign a like parole for the men of their commands. The arms, artillery, and public property be parked and stacked, and turned over to the officer appointed by me to receive them. This will not embrace the sidearms of the officers, nor their private horses or baggage. This done, each officer and man will be allowed to return to their homes, not to be disturbed by United States authority, so long as they observe their parole and the laws in force where they may reside.
These terms are the best we could hope for. His only request is that his men be allowed to keep their mounts, as many are farmers and may need them. Grant sees this and allows all men to keep their mounts upon leaving for home. Grant's adjutant, Brigadier General Eli S. Parker, a Native American, writes it down and hands over the pen for signing. Lee, realizing Parker to be Seneca, stares at him and extends his hand.
It is good to have one real American here. Sir, we are all Americans.
Lee then pens his name down and the deed is done. Just as both are about to leave, Grant asks about rations. Lee's men must be fed, and while the move touches Lee greatly, he honestly has no idea how many men he has. Grant offers 25,000 rations, appointing Generals Gibbon, Griffin, and Merritt to serve as commissioners for peace. Lee appoints Longstreet, Gordon, and Pendleton. As Lee walks out of the house, the Union men cheer.
I at once sent word, however, to have it stopped. The Confederates were now our countrymen, and we did not want to exult over their downfall.
Realizing the importance of this occasion, General Custer leads the way in purchasing all that fills the room to protect it for posterity. The next day, Lee delivers his final address. Rain muddies the ground right before it. Grant tries to get Lee to surrender all armies in the field as General-in-Chief, but he declines, either unwillingly or unable. The rain delays the writing of the speech, but Lee finally issues his last order.
Headquarters, Army of Northern Virginia, 10th of April, 1865. General Order Number 9. After 4 years of arduous service marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, the Army of Northern Virginia has been compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources. I need not tell the survivors of so many hard-fought battles who have remained steadfast to the last, that have consented to the result from no distrust of them. but feeling that valor and devotion could accomplish nothing that could compensate for the loss that must have attended the continuance of the contest, I have determined to avoid the useless sacrifice of those whose past service have endeared them to their countrymen. By the terms of the agreement, officers and men can return to their homes and remain until exchanged. You will take with you the satisfaction that proceeds from the consciousness of duty faithfully performed, and I earnestly pray that a merciful God will extend to you his blessing and protection. With an unceasing admiration of your constancy and devotion to your country, and a grateful remembrance of your kind and generous consideration for myself, I bid you an affectionate farewell. R.E.Lee, General. General Order, Number 9.
Thus Lee departs, and the 12th begins the formal surrender, with General Chamberlain leading the Union, the tattered rebels marching, laying down their arms, and being added to the registrar. Over 28,000 men surrender, and this is just the beginning. As news goes out of Lee's surrender, the remaining rebels realize all is lost. In back-to-back victories in southern Alabama, the Union took over the Spanish fort on the 8th, and the next day, Fort Blakely followed. On the 12th, the Union forces under General Canby enter Mobile, Alabama. Rebel forces remain in the state, but make no mistake, the heart of Dixie has been returned to the fold. Virginia has gone silent, Alabama pacified, and Sherman just really needs to wrap up his conquer of the Carolinas. The 9th, a skirmish at Dingle's Mill, is inconsequential, as is a cavalry confrontation at Morrisville on the 14th and 15th. On the 11th, Sherman had learned of Lee's surrender and begins a march directly towards Davis. The Confederate president holds a conference with his cabinet, General Beauregard and Johnston. The news of Lee's surrender has broken the spirits of the secessionists. They argue back and forth about negotiating surrender. The military officers leave ready to get the best terms possible from Sherman. Lincoln, even before his first inauguration, had the stress of a divided nation on his shoulders. It's taken its toll on his life. He has aged decades in just 4 years. Here he stands. The war is coming to an end. He has organized the Fort Sumter flag raising but won't be there. His week is filled with celebration. On the 11th, he gives his victory speech.
Let us all join in doing the acts necessary to restoring the proper practical relations between these states and the Union, and each forever after innocently indulge his own opinions, whether in doing the acts he brought the states from without into the Union, or only gave them proper assistance, they never having been out of it.
The next day, the culmination of some confusion. Confederate Campbell, a former Supreme Court justice, was under the impression Lincoln wanted to call the insurgent Virginia legislature. He never will. On the 13th, after conferring with General Grant, Secretary Stanton, and Secretary Wells, the draft is halted. The Army is ordered to reduce its officer corps. Men who have faced death for years were finally allowed to put down the sword, take up the plow. This terrible war started in April 1861 with the bombardment of Fort Sumter. Major Robert Anderson was forced to lower our beautiful flag in the face of enemy artillery. Since then, hundreds of thousands of men have died. Our once beautiful plains are stained with the blood of brothers. Homes are now burnt husks, a permanent memory of the struggle for the Union. But on the 14th of April, 1865, the same flag that was unduly lowered all those years ago, the flag that rallied brigades to the cause, has been kept with the solemn hope that may one day return to its rightful place, is brought back to Fort Sumter. Holding it is the now Major General Robert Anderson, aged and sickly, but still an American doing all he can for this nation. Ships find their way around Fort Sumter. Sadly, the Star of the West, which once failed in its mission to resupply Sumter, can't be there, having been sunk during the Vicksburg campaign. But a suitable replacement is there. Captain Robert Small is the brave man who not only escaped slavery, but brought many of his enslaved brethren with him, stealing a secessionist steamer. The day's speakers, Henry Ward Beecher and William Lloyd Garrison, say splendid words, but they can do little to compare to the beautiful sight, as General Anderson raises the flag. It's down 3 stars, Kansas, West Virginia, and Nevada. It can never be called out of time, though, for the symbolism of the tattered banner returning to its place among the nations is a permanent testament to the strength of this nation's ideals. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As I said, Lincoln isn't there. His celebration is smaller. He spends the early parts of the day taking visitors and communicating with his cabinet. The question of how to deal with Confederate leaders causes voices to be raised, but on this day, Lincoln has but one thing on his mind. 8:30 p.m., he and Mary Todd will get to attend a play at Ford's Theater. The day goes on and everyone seems to turn melancholic and paranoid, except for Lincoln. For months, his pale demeanor seemed sickly and stressed, but this day, his face is filled with satisfaction and hope. As a break, he takes a ride with Mary Todd, who's actually startled by the life in Lincoln.
I consider this day, the war, has come to a close.
He has an early dinner before cutting a meeting with Congressman Arnold short.
Excuse me now. I am going to the theater. Come and see me in the morning.
The theater issue has been more than expected. Lincoln's bodyguard won't be able to attend with him, so he begs old Abe not to go, as does Stanton, for it was reported that General Grant would attend with him. This is incorrect. Ulysses' wife Julia hates Mary Todd and does not wish to spend a moment, much less hours, with her in a confined box. Stanton also refuses to go for two reasons. One, he believes Lincoln shouldn't go, and the other, he dislikes Mary Todd. Governors have meetings to attend, other officials have promises to complete. Lincoln then turns to Major Eckert, a strong man in the War Department able to break cast-iron pokers. He could indeed defend the first couple. Stanton, trying to put his foot down, orders Eckert to decline. Instead, the Lincolns go with the lovely couple of Clara Harris, daughter of Senator Harris, who brings her fiancé and stepbrother, no comment, Major Rathbone, who can surely protect the president. The spectacle at Ford's Theater that night isn't Our American Cousin, but Our American President, Lincoln himself. The presidential box was modified, a band planned to serenade him, and for the more scrupulous among us, scalpers resold tickets far beyond their price, all for a chance to see the victorious Lincoln. The executive party arrives 38 minutes late. As they enter, the actors are stopped, notes to Hail to the Chief begin to play. The audience stands up and gives a standing ovation to the president, who makes his way to the box, thrilled to see a rocking chair there for him. Peering out of the presidential box, blocked by a pillar bearing the face of George Washington, our commander-in-chief graciously bows before the people, before taking a seat and watching the play. As I said earlier, Ford's Theater is mainly concerned with the president, modifying a line. When a character asks for a seat away from the draft, the normal response is,
Well, you're not the only one that wants to escape the draft.
This time around, it's,
The draft has already been stopped by order of the president.
The spirit of warmth and comedy continues, with the Lincolns enjoying every hilarious beat. Mary Todd takes great pleasure in bringing Abe's attention to various things on the set. Realizing how close they were physically, she asks,
What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on you so?
She won't think anything of it.
A dark figure makes his way to Ford's Theater. He's a well-known man and also the scum of the earth. The Kirkwood Hotel, one George Atzerodt arrives with a knife and gun. His goal to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. He goes to the bartender wishing to learn of Johnson's habits. Honestly, that bartender probably knows Johnson very well. He also knows how to sell alcohol, and eventually Atzerodt, drunk, walks out, throwing away his knife, making his way to a different hotel, and passing out. The dark figure waits, watching as the policeman guarding the box goes to get a drink, leaving behind only a White House footman, Charles Forbes. William H. Seward is still recovering from his accident on the 5th. He's resting at his home in Lafayette Square, attended to by his family. A strange man named Lewis Powell arrives, telling the maitre d' Bell that he is here to bring medicine to the good secretary, and that he must show him how to take it in person. He makes his way past Bell, but is stopped by Seward's son and Assistant Secretary of State, Frederick. Powell again explains he just has medicine, but Frederick doesn't believe him. He also explains that his father's asleep and shouldn't be woken. Fanny Seward, hearing this, goes out of the secretary's dressing room and exclaims,
Fred, father is awake now.
Now knowing where the man is, Powell brings out his pistol, points it to Frederick's temple, and a misfire. Barely missing a beat, he begins to bludgeon Fred with it unconscious. Bell runs out yelling murder, summoning help. Powell then takes his knife, brushes past Fanny, and stabs Secretary Seward in the neck brace. While permanently scarred, William H. Seward will survive this. Powell is now cornered by Augustus, another son, and a soldier, both unarmed, and both are soon stabbed. And Powell escapes, throwing away his knife and yelling that he is mad. Not knowing what is going on, the Lincolns continue to enjoy the performance as the play begins to end. At this point, the main hero has triumphed, giving away his fortune. Infuriating Miss Mountchessington yells at him about not knowing good manners or how to live properly in society, and storms out.
Don't know the manners of good society, eh? Well, I guess I know enough to turn you inside out, old gal, you sock-dozzling old man-trap.
John Wilkes Booth has just unloaded a bullet into President Lincoln's head. 10:13 p.m., a moment that will haunt the nation forever. Major Rathbone moves to seize Booth, but Booth charges him with a knife, cutting him deeply. Rathbone sinks in a pool of his own blood. Booth jumps the box, catches his heel on the flags, decorating the box, falls to the stage, breaks his foot. He He rises, waves his dagger, and yells,
"Sic semper tyrannis!"
The audience is left stunned, unsure of what has happened, until a scream comes from the presidential box.
They have shot the president! They have shot the president!
Doctors rush to the president's aid. After much debate and deliberation, they bring him across 10th Street to the Peterson house, placing him diagonally on the mattress, where he lays for the next 9 hours. Mary Todd Lincoln, crying over him as the cabinet minus C word, for obvious reasons, arrive. Secretary Stanton takes charge, beginning investigation into the assassination. As men rush out of the room to fulfill this order, 2 visitors enter, Senator Charles Sumner and Robert Lincoln. Realizing the state his mother's in, Robert calls Mary's best friend, who leads her out of the room. Though as the minutes become hours, Mary returns. She exclaims,
"Oh, that my little Taddy might see his father before he died."
All others in the room think better than bringing a 12-year-old boy to watch his comatose father die. Mary again yells, jumps up, and faints. Stanton enters the room and demands,
"Take that woman out and do not let her in again."
A crowd forms outside the house. Secretary Wells moves to Lincoln's head, listening to the faint respiration. Vice President Johnson is summoned, though Sumner asks him not to stay long as Mary does not like the Tennessee man, might make a scene. Johnson leaves ready to take over as president. Many times it seemed as if the president would die, and each time Mary would enter.
She again seated herself by the president, kissing him and calling him every endearing name.
She was led out to the front room one last time. The seconds felt like ages, till it stopped. 7:22. The struggle was over. Lincoln's face grew peaceful as he passed. Mary is soon informed.
"It is all over. The president is no more."
Johnson waits until 3 hours later to be sworn in as president. Those in the room become overcome with emotion. Robert sobs loudly as he leans on Senator Sumner for comfort. Stanton, with tears in his eyes, raises his right arm in a salute, removes his hat, then raises it again.
Now, he belongs to the ages.
That's where the war ends. One last death, one last loss against the best of us. For 4 years, the war has taken our brothers, fathers, sons, daughters, those we hold dear, and those we could one day love. One last casualty, one final cost to pay, a man who has worked, struggled, and fought for this nation. This world that he now leaves, he leaves behind a new nation, forged in blood, baptized in fire, and now orphaned. That's where it all ends. Sirs and madams, I've had the absolute honor and privilege of reporting to you for the first time in 4 years. I will not see you next week. I'm really going to need to clean this place. Oh yeah! Signals time! He did not learn of Lee's surrender until the 2nd of May, or of Lincoln's loss till the 17th of June. With his mission satisfied in Panama, he turns back home to Washington. The war has taken his leg, but Reconstruction will take the rest of his life and many others.